Welcome to the Spend Advantage podcast by Verisource. Spend Advantage is the competitive advantage for your spend across 100 plus vendor categories. This podcast is all about interviewing amazing people, company, and solutions that will help you 10x your top line growth as well as bottom line savings for your business. Hello, everyone. This is Victor with Verisource. Welcome to another episode of the Spend Advantage podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Will Huffman with InMoment with us. Will is the principal of customer experience advisory at InMoment. InMoment is an all-in-one AI customer experience platform that helps you collect, understand, and act on every customer signal. Welcome to the show, Will.
Thank you, Victor. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, super excited about the conversation today because
Yeah.
personally, I love customer experience, customer journey, and all of these topics. So, if you don't mind, maybe give the audience a little bit of background about you and kind of the company story would be great.
Yeah, great. So InMoment, we were founded back in 2002 by three entrepreneurs who had a real strong passion for using technology to really understand and transform the experiences that brands were providing to their customers. And so they really kind of set out to automate and analyze that feedback from real customers, transforming the way brands really identify problems and opportunities and experience, which that really meant emphasizing the importance of being present and attentive to customers and really fully engaged to create those memorable moments, hence the name InMoment. Fast forward a decade or so later, and with the massive of evolution of technology and overarching CX strategy, it's really enabled InMoment to turn the idea of traditional surveys on its head. So, 4 or 5 years ago, we introduced this concept of experience improvement. It's actually, we call it XI, which is also the name of our platform, with a solution designed to help our clients really reap true business value from their experience efforts. And that starts similar to how you introduced us, by identifying and prioritizing and then taking action to improve those moments that matter. So I got started in the CX industry a long time ago. I was actually at a conference, in a customer engagement conference back in, this is probably 2006. And Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos, was there presenting, and he was introducing his new book called the Art of Customer Happiness. And it really kind of introduced the concept or the discipline of CX, and I was hooked. Being an avid reader, started reading The Ultimate Question by Reichheld and Markey, which are the inventors of the Net Promoter System, and it really got me hooked. And I truly felt that it was the great opportunity for brands to truly differentiate themselves, especially in markets that are highly commoditized. So I've been working in the CX space, both leading CX organizations within Fortune 500 companies, but also over the past few years, been working with InMoment to help others do the exact same. So with the advent of this great technology that we have, and with the strategic insights and the strategy, we're really showing companies how to take advantage of it.
Yeah. First of all, I love working with people and partners who obviously you have a lot of experience, but you're just passionate about your craft, man. Like you really, love and understand, this customer experience. And yeah, I have a couple examples. Obviously, we have tons of questions to go through, but I think of, customer experience. It can go so deep, right? And I think it really a good customer experience, I personally believe, really determines the customer success, right? The overall success of the business. And but I look at customer experience similar to like a voice over IP or cloud. What I mean by that is it's such a big word. It's so broad, right? It
Mhm.
sounds amazing, but then a lot of time people have a hard time understanding what it all is and what it includes and what it means. So in your kind of expertise, can you kind of define maybe what you think customer experience means?
If you were to ask my wife that back in, say, 2012, I was actually listening to her try to explain what I do for a living at a party that we were at. She was talking to some of her friends, and I was like flabbergasted by her response because she was like, well, he does customer experience. And the response was, I'm not quite sure what that means. And that's no different than what we hear. Thankfully, it's becoming less frequent, but it's no different than what we typically hear in the market of like, hey, customer experience, that's a really nebulous definition or a phrase. So is it customer service? Is it customer engagement? Is it marketing? Is it fluff? And so, we've kind of set out on a mission to really define what CX means. And so, the best way that I've come to describe it is it's really the rational and irrational thoughts that a customer has after interacting with a brand. Like that's probably the truest definition. And so if you think about it from, let's say that you think about your telco, your internet provider, and you'll get a monthly bill, you'll interact with the product. God knows that if you have an outage, you're probably going to have to contact customer service. So you have all these different interactions, ranging from the rational, meaning did I get my problem solved, to the irrational of do I really feel like this is providing value? And so if you take a step back and think about, hey, is this provider the right provider for me? You take all of those considerations into hand. So with CX, what we're trying to do is not only help the transactional experiences, the rational experiences, but also better formulate the opinion of that organization and the customer's mind to help with that overarching relationship. That's really how CX is defined, and really how to start thinking about it is. And honestly, I think a lot of organizations are still treating CX as really just customer service or just transactions. And where they're kind of missing the point is on that relational level. How do customers think of us from like pure value?
Yeah, I love that definition, and there's so much to unpack there. But let's break it down a little bit, kind of based off of what you said. So, obviously, customer signals can be, in so many areas and so many things. There's so many data points. So, what are customer signals, and why do you think most companies don't have a full picture of it?
Great question. So customer signals are really customer data points, either structured or unstructured data that exist in the overarching relationship with the brand. So let's double click into that. So sometimes like a customer could be talking directly to you, like in a survey or a customer service phone call or chat transcript. Or maybe sometimes they're talking about you, right, on social, on review sites. Or sometimes they're not even talking about you, but they're talking about your competitors or your industry. So these customer signals that you mentioned, they really come in a many different forms: surveys, reviews, chat logs, even the call notes that your agents are entering after a customer service transcription, or email threads that maybe your sellers are having with their prospects, or maybe it's the call center transcript. So you've got a lot of these various signals that are out there, and like I said earlier, they come in like a structured form, meaning kind of defined or numeric, and unstructured, which is like this free form text. And so the real bottom line is that these customer signals, they come in so many different shapes and sizes and channels, and they can be really noisy and siloed, and really they can be quite expensive to capture and make sense of. So I think back to an organization that I've worked with quite a bit, and they had a survey platform, right? They had a review platform, they had a call center, and every one of those either the telephony platform or the email platform or the review platform, they all had their own various ways of analyzing that data, but none of them were synonymous with each other. And so when the CX leader went to go try to analyze what was happening, what are the friction points, what are customers like across all of those touch points and all of those journeys, they couldn't get a good picture of it. They needed a better way to analyze it cohesively. So that's what we are doing at
Yeah,
InMoment today.
I love that. So you mentioned a couple key words. I want to break that down a little bit. So you mentioned obviously unstructured data and structured data, and again, we you and I kind of deal in this world every day, so we kind of understand what that means and the impact of it. But if we were to talk to, executives, right, and who are not maybe dealing with these type of data on a daily day-to-day basis, but they obviously care a lot about customer happiness, customer success, and customer satisfaction, all these things. So you guys had a data point where you mentioned 85% of customer experience data is unstructured. First of all, can you kind of define what unstructured data means, and why are these data unstructured? And how does that make it more difficult for companies to utilize it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So structured data is really any of that free form text or free form data that we can collect. And there's a massive proliferation of the way in which companies are aggregating all of this unstructured data today. The structured data is very kind of fits in a nice neat bucket. Typically, it's numeric or quantitative in some way, shape, or form, and you can easily analyze it. So the stat that I mentioned, the stat that you mentioned is 85% of customer experience data is being unstructured. It's kind of a bit surprising statistic to some, in fact it came from IDC, and they actually said that not only is it 85% of the data that organizations have on their customers is unstructured, but they've also stated that it's growing at a rapid pace. And I would argue it's the most important and insightful element of data, as this unstructured data, it really tells you the why behind all of those quantitative metrics. So, if you talk to CX leaders or insight leaders, they're ecstatic about this proliferation of unstructured data, right? Because if you think about traditional surveys, they've stood the test of time and they will still be there for the long term. But really, they only represent about 6% of your customers if you take into account response rates to surveys and deliverability and things of that nature. But so they're giving good feedback, but it's not representative of 100% of your base, and it's more than likely not including any of your potential customers. So with this unstructured data, brands now have the ability to understand the remaining, say, 94% of customers that exist, right? And that comes in the way of call center transcripts or email reviews, social reviews, all these other means, case notes, all these other means of unstructured data. You can now understand really the meaning behind all of those
Yeah.
quantitative metrics.
And that kind of gets us to the next, topic that I'm really interested and curious to get your thoughts on. People talk about, obviously you can't optimize what you can't measure. And when I kind of apply that to, what Verisource does for clients, obviously we focus a lot on spend optimization. And when I look at the vendor spend or the vendor side, most companies are measuring their vendors, their suppliers across multiple tools, right? You have spend it's in finance, right? And you have contracts and legal, right? In another tool, and maybe it's a bunch of spreadsheets, and it's just all over. And a lot of that is also unstructured data, meaning it's not in a database somewhere. It's not cleaned up. It's just again in a PDF. It's in an image. It's in a file. Like you can't extract it. You don't, right? And so I think there's a lot of similarities, and I bring that up because if your vendor supplier data is in so many different places and you don't have kind of that clear picture of it, of that vendor spend and risk and obligation, how can you optimize, right? How can you try to improve on your pricing and all those things? And obviously that's what we do for clients, but I just see a lot of similarities when you talk about kind of the gaps that companies have today, as far as all the data is either unstructured or it's all siloed in different tools in different places. And so, I guess, which makes it hard for them to measure and optimize. But if you were speaking to a CEO or, a executive, how, if they can't, obviously optimize, that how does that affect a company's ability to make decisions, you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it's an easy problem to fix. To be able to analyze all of this data, both structured and unstructured, a few years back, or maybe 5 to 10 years ago, that would be quite a large exercise, and quite a costly one. Today, it's just not that. It's just not the case. Especially when you start mixing in tools like generative AI into the mix to start analyzing it. And so, I think that the typical measures will persist. Your traditional metrics like NPS or customer satisfaction, they will always have their place. But really, in order for a business to impact, to have a strong impact, they're now moving from what we call from metrics to meaning, right? So, if you're, for instance, if your business outcomes or customer metrics, maybe they're flat, and most of the time, what's going to happen is that customer listening is going to be the first place that companies start to examine, and then from there, they'll seek to understand from that unstructured data why these trends are emerging, and especially like when these metrics drop, they have to get to the stories that are behind them. I think about, again, I'm going to go back to a telco example. There was when I was leading CX at one of them, we had a region in the country that we were not seeing any growth. In fact, we were seeing costs, kind of skyrocketing, and a lot of the acquisitions and LTVs were flat. And it wasn't until we started getting behind the scenes, both in the customer listening, but also with the employee listening, that we were able to start isolating what the key challenges were. And in many respects, it was some broadband performance in a couple of different regions. And the answer, now that you start pairing all this data together, was actually not that difficult relative to the return that you would start to get out of it. So, it's having that data readily available, it absolutely starts to
Yeah.
influence these outcomes
No,
that
I
companies are
love that.
looking
And
to
I
achieve.
totally feel that on a daily basis. I think what you're solving for, again, that customer experience side, same thing on the vendor side. I think once you put all the data together, it turns out customer actually has a lot of leverage. And but without, to negotiate and during renewals
They
and
do.
all those things. But I think it just, a lot of companies just don't have that way to aggregate the data. But the next question kind of goes into, let's say, once the data is aggregated through you guys or through customer CX kind of platforms. Can you give like maybe two or three examples of what type of insights can companies expect and benefit from for their business?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. With all those signals combined, brands really know where to start to focus and drive their teams for the biggest impact. So, a couple examples. So one is, hey, what's working well? And what can we be highlighted in marketing initiatives? So, when you start to look at who are your biggest promoters of your brand, or those that score you very high, what are they saying about you, and how can you better leverage that in customer acquisition efforts? And then maybe you start to think about, hey, what could be improved? One commonplace that brands start to look at is their touch points with customer service. And more likely than not, first contact resolution on that service call has the biggest influence on those outcome metrics. And so they want to start understanding, hey, okay, I understand that first contact resolution is important, but what am I supposed to do about that? Right. And so, you start to look at, like, say a B2B organization. You're starting to see a quarter over quarter decline in account level responses. And maybe you combine that with increasing negative sentiment in that account, that you can hear in the phone calls from the transcripts. So in the past, that you may have been blind to that a bit. And now, with the advent of all these signals combining, now you can get in front of it. and start taking action. And we call that closing the loop, but really taking the action and averting some of that potential churn. And then you can start to look at, hey, which of our customers are likely to buy more? Which ones should we go out and market to, and try to increase that LTV? And then finally, I think one of the insights that a lot of folks tend to neglect is, what are our non-customers? What are they saying about us, and what are they saying about the competition out on social media or in other signals? And so now you're blending together these insights from the experiences that you're providing to your customers, but also to the perception of your brand out in the market. And so
Yeah, I can
those two
think of a
combined
hundred more use
brings a whole
cases
lot of
similar
powerful
to you. I mean,
insights.
obviously, data's oil, but I think like people still
Yeah.
need to figure out how to work with that data. So the next question I think is the billion dollar question here. Because I think if most company understands how to achieve this, then they can all potentially become billion dollar companies, which is data is amazing. I mean, first of all, people are operating without the data and knowledge and insights today mostly. And that's why I think the CX platforms like yours are so amazing. But I've also seen enough across the industry to know that having data is not enough. You also have to take action, right, on that data. Now, the billion dollar question for you, and the challenge is sometimes to take that action. One, the companies needs to kind of know, be able to decipher the data and figure out what the actions are, number one. But number two is sometimes to do those actions in their mind is very difficult. Maybe it involves, changing processes. Maybe it involves, changing things across multiple departments. And again, anytime you do any changes, it's hard, it's difficult, right? And it could be a slow process. So, based on what you've seen with customers that are very successful with you guys, how would you, kind of answer that two part? One is, how do you guys help customers take that action? First, figure out what the action is, and then two is how do you see companies really be successful in taking those actions? Because sometimes it might be to them in their mind maybe a big process or a lot of changes.
Change management is hypercritical in customer experience, and some of the best CX leaders are those who are able to influence. And in order to influence, you really kind of need those data backed inputs, to show value. Because otherwise, organizations are going to be reluctant to devote any of their resources. Because as we all know, every company out there has a list a mile long of things they want to work on. So it's a fantastic question, and this is one of the things I'm super excited about, and I talk to our customers about it almost daily, which is, the answer to your question of how do I know where to focus, and where should I prioritize all these these improvements or these enhancements. And so what we have a tool that we call Impact Predictor. And Impact Predictor is really this a way of bringing together all of this data into one common platform, and then running some really nice regression methodologies behind it. And it basically says, hey, if I want to influence retention, or if I want to influence acquisition, or I want to lower my costs, what do I need to do? And so this tool runs regression against all of this data that we've brought into the platform and says, these are the top 5 areas where you need to focus. And it's an order of of impact. So let's take, for an example, something that I used earlier, say within your customer care center, and you're getting all these phone calls that are coming in, and you're seeing first contact resolution being a very important feature, but you're also seeing other drivers such as maybe it's wait time, or maybe it's things like agent helpfulness or professionalism. And so what it's able to do is understand what those drivers are that are influencing, say, your cost within the call center. But now it's able to start interpreting which ones have the most impact. Couple that with generative AI, now you're able to go say, okay, when we talk about first contact resolution, what does that actually mean? And so this generative AI model is now through a tool that we call Smart Summaries, is you're now able to go out and say, tell me what I need to do to improve first contact resolution. So you start with a what's the most important, and now you're starting to interpret all of these signals, whether it's chat transcripts or call logs or survey responses. And now you're able to see instances of what are customers saying regarding first contact resolution. And then it's going to tell you what it's going to make suggestions as to what you need to do to go and improve. So now you've kind of got the quantitative backing coupled with the customer feedback, customer coupled with employee feedback, all of this kind of being analyzed through generative AI. Now you have that business case to go and take to your ELT to start moving
Yeah,
things.
and the follow-up to that, love to get your feedback, is first of all, I'm very passionate. I'm just like you're very passionate about CX. I'm very passionate about what I call spend advantage, which we look at as, and that's obviously the name of the podcast as well, is companies spend a lot of money on a lot of things. And, what is that ROI? What is and yet the interesting thing is they spend all the money, yet they have none of the leverage. The vendors have leverage. And so, I look at it
Yeah,
as, how can we partner with the right companies like yourself to provide that spend advantage, which is the competitive advantage for their spend, similar to how you're doing it for CX, and to give that company a competitive advantage over their competitors, right? Or for their customers. So, the question is that what kind of ROI, can companies expect when they implement something like this, and how long does it usually take? But I want you to go a little bit, maybe more, provide some numbers, provide something that, the C levels can really
yeah.
take it and kind of think about it.
Sure. Yeah, you look at this category, and it's a couple of the analyst services have come out and said, 1 in 5 CX programs are at risk of being pulled because they're unable to prove ROI. And so that's scary. And it doesn't necessarily have to be. There's plenty of ways in which CX organizations can calculate their impact with ROI. So I'll give you a couple examples. Right, one of the first ones is how can you tie the impact of CX on customer and revenue retention. And so one example is we were working with a financial services company that were really focused on tax software. And so we were able to identify, kind of what's the companies that were, or the customers that were at risk because of really low CX scores, and able to not only just to determine what are the root causes of those, but also the means of which they can go back in and save. So, if they only save 10% of those customers who are at risk, that would have saved a little over $1 million in revenue. So right, so just 10% of those that we identified as at risk, you could have saved a little over $1 million in revenue. So now you start to look at the return versus the investment of, let's call it several $100,000 to bring all this together for them. Now you're starting to look at a 3 to 4x ROI right out of the gate. Now you start to look at the ability to acquire new customers as a result of great CX. And so I've worked with a large consumer products brand that found that their promoters spoke positively about their brand. Of those that did, they talk about it to roughly 7 of their friends and family members. And so when you start factoring in the typical conversion rate, multiply that by the average lifetime value of a new customer, that equates to about $700 of revenue generated from customer referrals. And that's a very easy extrapolation into what your overarching return could be when taking into account the number of customers that are promoters. But a very common example is really in cost reduction. So you don't always, sometimes you don't really tie the, hey, if I provide great CX, I'm going to reduce my cost. but that really is a great byproduct or outcome of it. So we partnered with a quick service kind of fast food chain to identify friction points within their drive-through experience. And these friction points were driving not only frustrating customer experiences, but it was also costing the company roughly $6 million as a result of a bunch of broken processes within that kind of fast food drive-through experience. So through our feedback and analysis, we were able to identify like 5 steps to resolve and avoid those costs and improve those experiences. So that equated to roughly about a 5x return on investment just in the first year alone. So it's really kind of measuring, when you think about the overarching measure of ROI, it can be done through a single one of those instances or through really all three of them. But I think one of the really powerful ROI proof points that exist came from Forrester. And they published a study last year that showed that companies with high levels of alignment across their customer facing functions, they realized 2.4 times higher the revenue and nearly double the profitability compared to those with very little alignment in their customer facing functions. And what ties those customer facing functions together is this CX strategy and more importantly, the art of listening, analyzing, and acting on those experiences.
So as we kind of wrap up with a couple last questions, I mean, I love everything you just said there. And I love you, kind of giving out the numbers that 1 in 5, even though they implemented, but then they couldn't see the ROI. And that is so fascinating, is just there's a vision to it, but sometimes because of the way companies implement it or manage it, they're not generating that immediate ROI. And so maybe executives then look at it as, oh, like, well, it's hard to then tie it back to the revenue and those things. And that's why I love the examples you gave. So maybe one of the last question is, if you were speaking, to a CEO of a company of any size, how would you, in a short period of time, maybe in less than a minute, explain why this is a must have versus, a nice to have of, hey, do you want to? Because let me kind of break that down a little bit. Because you could go to a executive or anybody in the company and say, hey, do you want to know what your customer think about you? Like, of course. Like, I hope so. Like, don't you want to know?
Yeah.
Like, don't you want to increase your revenue? Like, you want all these things, right? Like, don't you want to know if your customer is unhappy and why and where? Like, I would hope every person would say yes. Like, they would want to know, right? But why do you think then that they still see this potentially as a nice to have versus a must have, right? And so I think so I'd love to kind of have you maybe, if you were talking to a CEO, how would you kind of describe it in a short period of time?
Yeah, I think there's so many ROI proof points that, several of which I just stated, showing the impact that great CX can have on performance, that really companies that can afford not to invest in improving the experience that they provide to their customers. So, as we all know, all of our customer expectations are constantly changing and are often being set by brands both inside and outside of their primary operating category. So they have to be prepared to listen to their customers, analyze what's happening with their customer base, and start evolving their organization to meet and exceed those expectations. I really do believe that companies looking to grow and most importantly grow profitably, they must have CX at the forefront of their organizational strategy. Not only is it really the right thing for their shareholders, but also for their employees and ultimately their customers. It's an absolute game changer if they've done it correctly.
Yeah, no, we're super excited about the partnership to bring that ability through our Spin Advantage program to all these companies. So the last question, Will, we always ask our guests is, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot. If you have to give maybe one personal and or business advice, maybe that that you're passionate about, what do you think that would be?
I am a avid believer in improving value and always, trying to uncover the impact that any initiative that you're going to be working on is going to have. And obviously I'm a I'm a staunch believer in CX, and I believe that doing right by the customer is the right thing to do for them and for your organization. And for you to be able to go back in and always think about how am I going to attach value to every one of these initiatives that I'm working on, whether it's to you personally or whether it's to your company. Always have the value in the back of your mind. I think that's the golden nugget that I would take away.
That is, I love that, man. I actually, yeah, I always thought to myself, if I were to get two tattoos of words, it would be value and leverage, and it just unpacks so much. But no, this has been a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for joining us and the partnership.
That was an amazing episode of the Spend Advantage podcast, where we show you how we can help you 10x your bottom line savings and top line growth for your business. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if you want to get the best deals from the guest today, make sure to send us a message at sales@verisource.com.